One of the most common things that people want to learn how to draw is the head. But also, I think that sometimes people over-obsess about specific artists. And this video is going to be all about how artists like Andrew Loomis or George Bridgman or the Riley method are looked at with these rose-colored glasses when in reality, most people actually don't use them. What I mean by that is I don't mean that they're actually not useful or not to study them, but that sometimes deviating from the lessons that they put in their books is actually a good idea. Using things like caricature or looking at fine art, comic book art, or even artists like Nikolai Fechin, who's considered a master of portrait drawing, and how those particular art forms can deviate from the golden rules of what these teachers put out. Before moving forward, I just wanted to say this video is brought to you by Skillshare. More on that later. Here's how the Loomis method, or more specifically the thirds, actually might make it more difficult to draw. In this case, if we look at this student's drawings, they're sticking pretty faithfully to the rule of thirds. From here down to the nose, down to the chin, is pretty close to what Loomis would be if you were following it exactly to the T. But if we look at the reference, the drawing deviates because this woman has a slightly longer nose and she's looking down. So naturally there's going to be an over-exaggeration of something like the thirds. Again, I think Andrew Loomis is a great base to go from, but when you take those rules as an absolute of what you have to do every time, you're going to put yourself in positions to where when those things stop working, in cases like extreme perspective, you're going to make your drawings distorted. When drawing the head, there really is no strategy that's better or worse than another. Andrew Loomis or George Bridgman or Riley are all strong in their own ways and might be better at solving certain problems than others. It's more about which specific drawing method is better for the specific use case versus one being better or worse than the other. In the case of a 3/4 head drawing, I actually might be more likely to tend to use Loomis type strategies, in this case starting with a circle and then building the jaw off that and doing the eyebrow into the center line, and then using something like the Riley abstraction for the eyes and relating the kind of sunglass shape of the eye sockets to each other to kind of get an indication, and then using the Loomis thirds to find where the nose might be. So breaking down the thirds of where everything might be to figure out where the nose is and where the chin is. So knowing the nose is right here, into some basic angles for the eyes, which is something that might be more Riley or Loomis-esque, into the mouth, adding more structure for the jaw, into the lips, and then using something like the Loomis cutting off the side of the head to represent where it might be flatter and to establish some perspective to figure out where the ear is, and then just going through and emphasizing the jaw. And for drawings like this, the goal is really not to be exactly accurate, it's just to get the impression of what's going on. And for angles that might be a little bit less ideal for something like Loomis, I'll shift up my strategy quite a bit. Instead of starting out with the Loomis circle and then building the kind of triangle shape of the jaw off that, I'll start with more of an envelope, just blocking in the shapes and then building everything within that. And in this case, I'm just really roughly laying things in and then expecting and hoping that I'll be able to kind of reel in my initial mistakes that I laid in the very beginning. But again, going back to Loomis, throwing in a brow line into a center line, Riley abstraction for an eye shape. And because I know that the perspective is maybe a little bit more extreme here, the thirds can't be as easily relied upon because we're looking more up on the jaw than we were before. And the Loomis thirds are still somewhat reliable here, but if I were to copy it exactly, I'd probably get it at least a little bit incorrect. And with drawing anything representational, when you're deviating from the little potentially correct or incorrect things in a drawing, those things can build up into much larger errors later on. For example, if you get the head shape wrong, and then you start comparing everything like the size of the whole body off the head, then the whole figure might be elongated. And again, for things that I am kind of guessing on, I'm just throwing in rough shapes. A lot of correct portrait drawing is not about drawing fast, it's about drawing correctly and making right decisions. You're trying to be really fast at being right, and you can't start making those decisions until you have a base. And that envelope is kind of like starting big to small, and then as those mistakes start to build up and cause issues, you fix them, because if you practice enough and you're aware of different strategies for drawing, then you're more likely to be able to have something in your toolbox to figure out that specific problem. And again, I know the title of the video is F word or fuck Andrew Loomis, but it's more of an example of how, you shouldn't necessarily count on rules or definitive things when it comes to art at all. There's always exceptions to the rule where somebody was able to break something like perspective or proportion or anatomy to make a really, really cool looking piece of artwork. If you look at any comic art, if you break down the anatomy, it's pretty easy to spot some leg that adds an extra head of the quads or something, or they have striations in the leg that look almost tumorous or something, but they still work as drawings. They still look really cool. And that's because they're focused on shape relationships and aesthetics over how exactly something like the radiobrachialis, where it connects to the body. Beyond all this stuff, I think it's really important to find practical use cases for how you apply these skills to creative projects. And that's where Skillshare comes in. Skillshare has classes on fine art, illustration, comics, all that kind of stuff. And I think in general, when you're applying your knowledge to a particular problem, like trying to make an illustration, you're more likely to integrate the information faster. Recently, I've been taking classes with Marquez Brownlee on Skillshare, and I've been really learning a lot about content creation, how to shoot a video, how to edit something to make it more interesting. Having a dedicated teacher for the thing that you're trying to do specifically can save a lot of the headache and time spent into trying to figure out exactly how things work. You can rely on their expertise and their experience in a particular subject while learning to apply the things that you've learned on your own to whatever thing that you're trying to do. For example, with learning something like illustration, you have to figure out what paper type to use, whether you want to use a canvas, how to prime it with gesso, all that kind of stuff. And with a teacher, you can have all of that stuff answered for you before you even start. The trial and error involved with even making it work technically is solved, so you can just focus on doing the thing. Skillshare is one of the biggest learning platforms out there, so whatever course you choose will end up being a good one. For the first 500 people to use the link in my description, you'll get a free month of Skillshare. As this stuff relates to drawing practically and in a way that lets you kind of find your own style, I think it's really important to just try a bunch of different things. If you're learning illustration, you're going to have to learn a different set of problems, even for drawing something like the head or figure, as if you're drawing for something like concept art or illustration or Magic the Gathering card art. As you move forward with your art career, you're going to have to figure out exactly the kind of stuff you want to do. And that's going to influence how you study and the kind of things you have to learn. I think that, again, studying specific artists like Andrew Loomis or anybody can be extremely helpful, but there are diminishing returns on how much that those artists will actually help you. I've made a bunch of videos on this idea, but if you spend all your time learning every single muscle in the body, that's going to help you theoretically, but ultimately it's that application of that knowledge that is going to be the defining factor in how good of an artist you are, or whether or not that information is practical at all to know. If you're a character artist, learning anatomy might be really, really helpful, but if you're a 3D concept artist focused on doing environments or props, learning about how exactly everything connects together from an anatomical level will actually not be helpful. In the same way that if you only focus on learning Andrew Loomis, you're going to be deficient in other aspects of your art practice. The more that you diversify and focus on the things that you really want to be learning as your own artist, the more likely you are to be able to be not wasting your time when you're studying. And I think people tend to want to defer to other artists that they really admire on what to study and how to draw and what exactly they should be drawing. But the way that you learn is by just practicing and kind of learning on the job. You don't learn exactly how to do concept art by only studying figures. You have to learn how to fit inside of a games pipeline, or how to solve very specific problems when it comes to clothing design or gun design. And if your only focus is how the rule of thirds can be applied to different 3/4 heads, you're realistically not going to be able to do the thing that you set out to do, which is totally okay, but it's a sacrifice that you're going to have to make. And when I draw, again, I'm drawing with every different kind of influence that I've had my entire artistic career. All of those things kind of come together in a way where knowing the objective stuff wouldn't do anything to deter any of the potential mistakes that I make when I draw normally. Extremely important to focus on why you're doing something and how it's relevant to your practice versus kind of blindly following what art is such a subjective thing that it's pretty unlikely that the people that are your teachers are going to know exactly what to do and how to get your exact taste working in the way that would be most beneficial in a commercial setting or even in a personal artistic setting. Something like anatomy, even in the case of what I'm drawing on the screen right now, is completely implied. I'm using very flowy lines like I learned similar to like the Riley abstraction, but also trying to keep in mind that I'm moving through and simplifying shapes with gesture in sort of a like Mike Matisse or force method kind of way. And it's not like I'm thinking of that intentionally as I'm drawing. I'm more implying shapes and again responding to them with the information that I am pretty sure that I know. The hard part about all this stuff is you can explain something like the rule of thirds in 5 or 10 minutes, but to understand it objectively takes years of practice trying to figure out exactly how that particular solution to a problem can be applied to a billion different head scenarios, or how you can break it to fit something like a cartoony character design or a caricature at Disneyland. And they're all, again, valid ways of drawing, but it's just dependent on what you choose personally.